was 13. 13's my lucky number. Now, she was married to Lance Corporal Corey Killgore. As a teenager, Brittany had dreamed of marriage and even wrote about marriage on her blog. Quote, "I want to be married. I want to love that person. But the divorce rate is so high." Now, she also shared in that blog her struggles with depression and a little bit about her marriage. Both Brittany and Corey were only 20 when they married, and they eventually called it quits when they were 22 years old. Now, when they decided to break off the marriage, Corey had been a Marine station at Camp Pendleton, which is just north of San Diego, but had been transferred for a tour of duty in Afghanistan, leaving Brittany alone in the small military town of Fallbrook, California. Fallbrook was a small town. It's kind of east of the entrance to the U.S. Marine Corps base, Camp Pendleton. Population, it's about 30,000, and most of those are military families. At the time, they lived at La Galeana, the Cortez Apartments. This was a small upstairs apartment, and it was pretty close to the entrance of the base. Brittany, had grown up in the Ozarks in Missouri. But since her family moved to Pennsylvania. So, once she was divorced, she didn't feel like staying in that military town. So on a rainy Friday afternoon of April 13, 2012, she began packing her bags. She and her friend Johnny Tull were packing boxes for the big move to Pennsylvania. But that same afternoon, another of Brittany's friends, Elizabeth Hernandez, had stopped by the home of Dorothy Marcolino and Louise Paris, who they were going to return a was so young and beautiful that Dorothy believed that she was kind of flirty with her husband, who, by the way, was 45 years old. Dorothy would often ask Elizabeth, "Why are you hanging out with Brittany?" And they kind of joke about that, and Dorothy would say, "I could get rid of her for you." But not judging anybody here, but Dorothy and Louise's relationship was kind of an interesting one. It was described not normal, whatever that means. The open marriage or the open relationship was kind of the most normal parts of their relationship. The two of them lived as master and slave in this twisted BDSM, which is bondage and discipline, domination and submission, sadism, masochism kind of relationship. And he was the dominant or the master of the household, while Dorothy was the submissive or the slave. She also was a switch, meaning she was submissive to him but would also be dominant to her own slaves. Together, the two of them took part in their BDSM lifestyle, whether live or, well, they had this lady, Jessica Lopez, who would live in with them, and I mean, she was basically their slave. They had a three-way relationship. In this relationship, Louise's name was Ivan, Dorothy was Dee, and Jessica was Rosalind. But there were some strict written rules, including a house manual, a perfect slave checklist, and a slave contract. Dorothy was the one that established these rules. Dorothy also had a contract that professed her as the sole property of Ivan or Louise. The contract entitled D to D, which is one of the most weird things I've read recently. I don't want to say ridiculous, but weird things. D to D. As if she was a car or a piece of property or, And it was signed in Dorothy's bloody thumbprint. Her license plate read IVNSKTN. Basically, Ivan's kitten. Now, it seems like their kids screaming far away, but was Luis, who was the master of both. He was a sadist and he wanted to inflict pain. Before he had choked his, I assume, previous partner every time they were intimate, and he would do it either with his hands or with a leather belt. He would have his slaves kidnapped by strangers, held prisoner, and tortured. This was kind of the next level with knives and chains. You know, grown-up toys. And he would keep videos of himself beating women as they begged him to stop. One of those videos show him beating a woman into unconsciousness. Then they had, at one point, he and Dorothy had this fantasy where they picked up a young woman in a parking lot and took her to their dungeon in the basement of Dorothy's home for BDSM play. Now that you know a little bit more about Dorothy and this guy Luis, or Dee and Ivan as they wanted to be called, let's go back to that rainy Friday afternoon at 4:38 p.m. After learning that she was leaving town, Luis Perez, he knocked on the door of Brittany's apartment, and she and Jenny, her friend, were packing boxes. Brittany was surprised really to see him. She barely knew the guy, and she didn't even know how he knew where she lived. He said that he asked around. He explained that he had purchased 2 tickets for this dinner and a cruise later that night, and wanted to know if she'd like to go with him. Now, they were not friends, and this was, in my opinion, that's just creepy. He was 23 years older than she was. She knew that he was in a relationship, and she was uneasy about this invitation. So she politely declined the offer, and she said that she'd stay in packing for her move. He wrote down his phone number and said, "Call me if you change your mind." He left the apartment, and he sent a text to Dorothy reading, it didn't work, or something like that, or it wasn't successful. And she replied, "Tomorrow is another day." A few minutes later, he gets a text message from Brittany. She wanted to know if he knew somebody who would help her or would be able to help her with the move. And he responded, quote, "Party with me tonight, and you'll have 5 guys there in the morning," end quote. She was still uncomfortable, but so she explained that she would love the hell but felt weird partying with him because she knew Dorothy. He replied, "She's okay with it. Here's her phone number. Give her a call." So for texted Dorothy, who immediately called her back. Jenny was listening to this conversation because Brittany put it on speaker. Dorothy was nothing but encouraging and said that she was fine with her going to have dinner with him, that they already paid for the tickets, and that she was pregnant with his baby, and that she didn't think it'd be a good idea to be on a boat and, make her, which she thought it would make her seasick anyway. So she hung up the phone with Dorothy, and she told her friend, "I still feel weird about this." She said that she was not interested in this guy, but she really would like to have some champagne and a 3-course meal, sailing, and kind of enjoying the Coronado Bay Bridge view. So by 6:10 p.m., Brittany changed her mind and sent a text to Louise and said that she'd go with him. He replied with, quote, "Be ready at 7:30. What she didn't know is that the cruise would leave by 7 p.m. and that the dock was an hour away from Fallbrook. So there was no way that they would be able to make it in time. But he never had tickets or the intentions to taking her on that cruise. Brittany borrowed 2 evening dresses from Jenny for the dinner cruise, but ended up on a dark purple one with a glittery purple flower pattern. She gave her friend the cell phone number of both Dorothy and Louise, just in case. At 6:38 p.m., Brittany messaged Elizabeth Hernandez to let her know about the date with this guy, Luis. And Elizabeth, who was the one with the initial idea to take her to this dinner, was kind of confused. She knew that she mentioned this to Louise and Dorothy earlier, and she thought that it was super weird because Brittany barely knew this guy and the other way around. Brittany received a text at 7:31 p.m. from this guy, Louise, that read, quote, "I'm running late. Be there in 5 minutes. Can you meet me at the curb?" Brittany replied, quote, "At the curb? It's raining, you know. I'd appreciate it if you drove into the complex." "It's not. I don't want to miss our boat," he responded. He knew there were security cameras in the complex and wanted to avoid them, but drove through anyway. At 7:36, surveillance cameras showed his white Ford Explorer entering the complex. 1 minute later, he texted, "I am here." At 7:39 p.m., Brittany messaged another friend, Jessica Perry. She lived in the unless in a text message she always used yeah. She continued to try to call her, but no answer. So she left a message asking her to call her back immediately. She said she needed to hear her voice. At 8:07, Gianni received another text. Quote, "In a few, period, hot guys," end quote. Gianni was certain this wasn't Brittany and insisted she call her immediately. At 8:09, 8:10, Gianni received 2 short phone calls. They were just a few seconds long, with loud music in the background. The calls were followed by another text message. "It's okay, music too loud," end quote. Over the next several minutes, Gianni contacted Brittany's other friends, Jessica and Elizabeth, and after trying Brittany's phone with no answer, Elizabeth called Paris's girl friend, Dorothy, who told Elizabeth that she knew nothing about the dinner cruise and that she hadn't spoken to Brittany at all that day. So it was a lie. Gianni heard her conversation with her friend. At 8:40 p.m., Jessica Perry called Louise, who answered the call. He told Jessica that he and Brittany had driven to downtown San Diego and went to this club, the Whiskey Girl. He said that Brittany had met a couple of Marines there, and he'd left her there basically when in the company of these guys. Jessica knew that this was a bunch of bullcrap, that this was out of character for Brittany. But the truth is that she never made it out of Fallbrook. Louise, Paris, and Dorothy, they tried to cover their tracks as much as they could. Dorothy had worked for a cell phone company and knew about how traceable the phones were. So she told him to drive towards downtown San Diego with Brittany's phone, and during the drive send text message to her phone saying, "Where are you? And your friends are calling me worried," to kind of cover his tracks. He also messaged Dorothy asking how her night was going, which she just replied with, "Just having a quiet night at home." This was a big and meticulous plan to kind of cover their bases. By 10:10 p.m., Gianni tried to call Brittany one last time, and when she got no response, she sent a text, "Should I call the cops?" Then Gianni received the text, "I'm okay." Then Louise, who obviously was using her phone to reply to her friends, he decided to dump Brittany's phone on a downtown street in San Diego. He drove back to Fallbrook from San Diego and called Brittany's friend, Jessica Perry, to kind of establish a stronger alibi. He said that he'd been driving around the Gaslamp district looking for Brittany, but then he was done and he wanted to go home. Elizabeth went to Brittany's apartment. She was not there, so they decided to call the sheriff's department. When a sheriff deputy called Louise, he was startled, but he offered to come to go to Brittany's apartment to talk to him. When he arrived at the apartment, Johnny and Elizabeth were still there, speaking to the police. Louise said that he had picked up Brittany that night, that she was already kind of drunk and was flirting with him. Johnny and Elizabeth immediately were like, "You're ridiculous. That's not what happened. My friend was not drunk." But Louise claimed that he had left Brittany at a club in downtown San Diego, where she was enjoying the company of a few Marines. He said that she kind of ditched him, and when he couldn't find her, he texted her before he left, and she replied with a text saying, "I'm okay." Now the police, they're not stupid, and they asked him, "Okay, just show us the text," but the texts were not there. They also were wondering about the Ford Explorer parked outside. The bumper and the running board of the vehicle were caked with mud. So the deputy asked for consent to go and search his vehicle, and he agreed. Inside the vehicle was an AR-15, which is an assault rifle. And this assault rifle had been stolen from Camp Pendleton. On top of that, it's just illegal in the state of California, or at least I'm assuming it still is, but it was at the time. So he was arrested on the weapons charge. That Saturday afternoon, Brittany's mother, Michelle, got a phone from Brittany's phone. It was a stranger that explained that a homeless man had found her phone on the streets of San Diego, and he was trying to sell it. Brittany's mom was not aware that her daughter was missing, but she knew that something was terribly wrong, so she called the police. On April 15, deputies began their search of the home of Louise Perez and Dorothy, and Jessica, of course, the slave. They stood in the front yard and watched. When the police arrived the following day to continue the search, they were gone, along with Dorothy's truck. Some things had been removed from the house. So law enforcement throughout Southern California were alerted to be on the lookout for her Nissan Titan with a license plate Ivan's Kitten. In the meantime, the forensic teams were analyzing the Ford Explorer and what they found inside. Blue latex gloves, a large piece of clear plastic sheeting with smeared blood on it, a plastic bag, and a stun baton. Brittany's DNA was there, was found on the Bronx. I mean, it was everywhere. The morning of April 17, Dorothy's truck was spotted in the parking lot of the Ramada Inn near San Diego Airport. According to the front desk, room 105 was registered to Dorothy, and when police knocked, there was no answer, but they knew that somebody was inside. It seemed like there was a woman crying. They opened the door and they found a half-naked woman wearing only a red skirt and combat boots. She was bleeding from several deep inflicted wounds on her neck and wrist. The bed sheets were soaked with blood. They had large knives, a scalpel. I mean, they were just laying next to the sink. There was also some alcohol, and at the foot of the bed was a red dog collar with a tag that read Rosalind, property of Misty. It wasn't Dorothy. It was Jessica Lopez, the slave. She was rushed to the hospital and then arrested. There was a note that said, "Pigs, read this." Below the note, there were 3 envelopes. One was addressed to Master Ivan, the other one to my parents, and the third one to a local television station. And each of them contained just one copy of a 7-page suicide note penned by Jessica Lopez. Where it was claiming that it was her that killed Brittany and not Dorothy or Louise. It read something like, quote, "You got the wrong effing person." In the letter, it was claiming that Dorothy and Louise were asleep upstairs while she was alone murdering Brittany. She described Brittany as a miserable C-word that came between them, Louise and Dorothy, and went into detail on how she killed her. According to this, she used a taser to knock her down and then restrain her legs and wrists before gagging her mouth. She then claimed to have tied a rope around her neck where she repeatedly applied and released pressure until she was dead. Everyone decided to work on their lawn, so it's going to be a little bit loud. But I'm going to try to close the windows to see if it makes it a little bit better. Anyway, then it said that she attempted to dismember the body with power tools, that she washed her body with bleach and then dumped her on the side of the road near Lake Skinner. So they went immediately to the area to look for the body. Jessica's letter went on about her love for Dorothy, and the police at this point decided to check the surveillance cameras, and they saw Dorothy being in the room when Lopez wrote the notes. Jessica took the first copy of the note to the hotel receptionist to make the copies, but Dorothy left the hotel at that point, or that morning rather, and boarded a plane to Virginia. But really, this note made no sense. It said that the murder happened at 11:15 p.m. And because of the string of text message, police already knew that this was obviously unlikely. She claimed that Brittany, who didn't drive, suddenly appeared at the house unannounced, and that she demanded sex from Louise, which makes absolutely no sense. But later that day, a maintenance worker clearing brush about a mile south of Lake Skinner found the nude body of Brittany Killgore, and it was in a ditch. The bruising on her wrists revealed that she had been bound with handcuffs. 5 small marks on the left side of her face were an exact match for the pins of the stun baton. Deep post-mortem wounds on her knees showed that someone had unsuccessfully attempted to dismember her body parts with a power saw. The cartilage surrounding her trachea had been crushed. Her eyes had hemorrhaging. The medical examiner could tell that pressure had been applied and released repeatedly over a long period. And this kind of matched what she wrote in that note. Ultimately, the cause of death was ligature strangulation. The lead detective, Brian Patterson, went to the spot where they found the body. When he received a call from Dorothy, who was still on the run, she told him that she and Louise were home that night and rented The Adventures of Rin Tin Tin. I mean, detective was more interested about the real story, so he questioned some of the inconsistencies. So Dorothy ended up hanging up. Only 2 days after they found the body, the police continued to search Dorothy's house, and this time they found the roll of plastic that Jessica mentioned in her note, and a blade from a reciprocating saw. They found BDSM photos, videos, documents, adult toys, and bondage equipment. One document recovered was a release of liability form, and it was a contract stating that Dorothy agreed to voluntarily endure Louise's beatings, whippings, and asphyxia, and that he held no responsibility in the case of injuries or loss of life, which, whatever, you can sign that, but it will still be, you'd still be committing murder. Great, she signed that, good for her, but still, the rules of BDSM do not apply to I lost an earbud, but they do not apply to real law and police work. But they also found another document in which Yeah, I'm not gonna read it because it's just, you have to see it to see how things are spelled, but it's weird and it's creepy. There was another document also that said, please consider accepting this gift. I leave all methods of retributions to you. Please destroy them all. You know, abuse women, destroy reputation, take their possession. It goes on and all kinds of disgusting, illegal, and I don't even know how to describe it, things. But there was another document wrote by her too that detailed a fantasy she had of coming up behind a person and slitting their throat. Oh, great. I mean, doesn't anybody, doesn't everybody think about that? Yeah, no, the answer is no. You're creepus. Other item found in the house was this nylon rope with hairs embedded in it, duct tape, plastic bags, a rope, a Black & Decker, 2 different kind of saw. That's what they found. Dorothy was eventually arrested on May 10th, 2012, and she was sent back to San Diego. Louise was still in custody on the weapons charge, remember? And all 3 suspects were charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, torture, and attempted sexual battery by restraint. With 3 defendants in custody, the prosecution began their analysis of the evidence to prepare for trial. They found BDSM websites, bmehookups.com, dsrnetwork.com, where basically Ivan, which is Louise, described himself as Lord and Master, and Dee as a slave, lover, and confidant. Dee's profile describes herself as an alpha slave to Master Ivan, which... okay. Alpha slave to Master Ivan. Sure. Their profile showed that they were looking for other sex slaves and couples to join them. They would describe what they would do at their homes, and also mentioned that Dorothy was pregnant with his baby. Louise requested that when the baby was born, she give custody to a friend of his by the name of Becky. She would visit both of them in prison regularly, but before the baby was born, and Dorothy agreed to give custody of this baby to Becky. According to Dorothy, what the agreement was that she would continue to live in the San Diego area and bring the child in for weekly jail visits. But when the baby was born, Becky took custody of the baby and moved to Central California. She stopped visiting, and Dorothy tried to regain custody, but at this point, it was a lost battle. One of Becky's visits to Louise, he admitted to her that everybody had a role to play that night, including himself. He even claimed later on that he was referring to the cover-up, not the murder itself. But that statement was used against him in court. But the prosecution had this dilemma, really, that Jessica's confession letter was an important piece of evidence, but her intention examiner and the FBI cryptanalysis units they deciphered the code, and it revealed a detailed plan to kidnap, torture, and murder a friend of Jessica Lopez. Over 3,000 jury summons were mailed throughout San Diego County, and they were warned of the unspeakable horrors that they would hear during testimony. Many potential jurors broke down in tears and asked to be relieved of duty. But the actual trial started September 8th, 2015, and all three defendants were tried together. The prosecution was careful not to take Jessica's admission of the murder as absolute truth and never indicated who exactly was responsible for Brittany's death. So they tried to blame each one of them equally. Ultimately, it was cell phone records that were actually the key piece of evidence against the three of them, because it showed that Brittany did not show up. She never showed up at their home unannounced, as Jessica claimed. The text message that were sent to Brittany's friends that evening were all sent from inside Louise and Dorothy's home. There's video evidence from the apartment complex showing that Louise picked her up that evening and that she was